Imagine sitting in a lethal vacuum, 215,000 miles from Earth,
Right?
strapped to a machine fueled by controlled explosions.
Yeah, quite a way to wake up.
Exactly. And your absolute highest priority for the morning is hunting down a dehydrated Easter egg. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, you are riding shotgun on flight day 5 of the Artemis II mission.
It is wild.
It really is. We are pulling directly from the raw NASA audio transcripts and the official highlight reels to see what a day in deep space actually feels like. Far beyond the polished press releases.
Okay, let's unpack this because the juxtaposition in these sources is it's crazy. We have highly technical orbital maneuvers happening right alongside these dehydrated Easter eggs.
Yeah, so to set the scene here, it is day 5. This is an incredibly pivotal 24-hour window. At this specific moment, the Orion spacecraft it has an elapsed mission time of 3 days, 18 hours, and 28 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, and they're 215,000 miles from Earth and about 63,000 miles from the moon, which is practically the doorstep, right?
It is. Day 5 is this crucial transition. They've pushed past the initial launch adrenaline, and they are now right on the precipice of the critical lunar flyby, which happens the very next day.
And we get to start this transition period exactly as the crew did, right? Waking up. At 11:05 a.m. Central Time, they get a wake-up transmission from Charlie Duke.
Oh, yeah. Such a great moment.
I mean, Duke flew the lunar module back on Apollo 16 in 1972, which, fun fact, was also named Orion.
That's right.
And in his wake-up call, he mentions that famous photo of his family, the one he left on the lunar surface half a century ago. It serves as this direct, almost poetic bridge from the Apollo era to the Artemis generation.
It immediately establishes this profound historical grounding. But then, as you mentioned, we pivot straight into the Easter eggs.
Right. From high poetry to egg hunts.
Exactly. So they're celebrating Easter Sunday. Yeah. And back in Houston, the Montroses family has this tradition of hiding confetti eggs for their kids. To keep that specific tradition alive on board, the crew actually hid dehydrated scrambled eggs around the cabin.
I love that. And right after that, we hear Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen receiving a gold astronaut pin.
The upgrade. Yeah.
Right, from his crewmates. It's the traditional upgrade from the silver pin once an astronaut actually flies in space. And Hansen takes the mic and he talks about looking back at Earth through a tiny window, and he shares this really beautiful message about universal love. And then Victor Glover hops on the radio just to wish his dad a happy birthday.
It's so humanizing.
It is. But, I mean, it's like moving to a new country and aggressively keeping your holiday traditions alive just to feel anchored, except the new country is a vacuum 215,000 miles away.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it.
But how do these seemingly trivial things like a gold pin or, dehydrated eggs actually serve a critical psychological function for mission success? Because it almost feels like a distraction.
Well, what's fascinating here is that space agencies heavily engineer the psychology of a mission just as much as the hardware. You cannot put a human mind into the profound isolation of deep space and expect it to run purely on telemetry data.
Right, they aren't robots.
Exactly. Without those emotional tethers connecting to Earth, whether through Charlie Duke's blessing or a holiday message, the psychological strain, the isolation, it rapidly degrades cognitive performance. Replicating Earthbound traditions prevents temporal drift.
Oh, where they lose their sense of time.
Yeah, because there's no natural day-night cycle out there. It maintains crew cohesion. So it's essentially a psychological survival mechanism disguised as a holiday celebration.
That reframes it entirely. It's not a break from the mission, it's maintenance for the humans.
I think so.
And speaking of maintenance, the sheer physical, biological reality of deep space hits them the second they finish reflecting on Earth.
Oh, yeah. The science doesn't stop.
It really doesn't. Before they exercise, before they even brush their teeth, the crew has to perform a saliva collection. The transcripts show they blot dry saliva onto the special paper inside these pocket-sized booklets to track human immune system functions. But why dry blotting paper?
The dry paper is an elegant solution to a really complex logistical problem. Freezing liquid samples requires power, mass, and space.
3 things you definitely do not have on Orion.
Right, you are severely lacking all 3. So blotting the saliva onto specialized matrix paper stabilizes the proteins and the RNA at room temperature. Then it can be analyzed weeks later. As for the mechanism of the immune suppression itself,
Yeah, how does spaceflight even compromise the immune system in the first place?
it basically comes down to fluid shifts and radiation.
Because there's no gravity pulling their blood down to their legs.
Precisely. In microgravity, fluids shift upward into the torso and the head.
I can imagine that feels terrible.
It does. It causes that puffy-faced look. But more importantly, this tricks the body into thinking it has too much fluid overall, which alters blood volume and dramatically impacts how white blood cells, specifically T cells, reproduce and function. Combine that cellular confusion with the constant bombardment of deep space radiation because they are outside the protection of low Earth orbit, and the immune system gets severely suppressed.
So gathering this data daily it's vital if we're ever going to keep a crew alive on a multi-year trip to Mars.
Absolutely foundational.
So they're literally their own biomedical experiments.
Yeah, they are.
And then immediately after that, we get this extreme tracking of mundane objects. There's a transmission from NASA astronaut Christina Cook. She radios Capcom Jenny Gibbons down in Houston.
And Gibbons is the Canadian backup for Artemis II, by the way.
Oh, right. Good context. So Cook is asking Houston for an official stow location for 2 lens caps, 2 tiny pieces of plastic, and she has to call mission control.
Because microgravity turns mundane objects into severe hazards. If a lens cap floats away, it isn't just lost. It becomes FOD, foreign object debris.
Right. I'm imagining it getting sucked into a ventilation fan or lodging behind some multi-million-dollar instrument panel and causing a short circuit.
That is exactly the threat. Everything, literally everything, must have a specific logged coordinate on the ship.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because while they are meticulously tracking down coordinates for plastic caps, the ship itself is executing a massive maneuver. They roll the entire Orion spacecraft by 20 degrees.
Yes.
The logs show this is to improve optical comm, which is a laser communication system using infrared light. It's like switching from a 1990s dial-up modem to gigabit fiber optic internet, but, doing it while hurtling through the void.
It's a huge upgrade from traditional radio waves.
Right. So why does rolling the ship 20 degrees matter for that?
Well, traditional radio waves like we used during Apollo have long wavelengths. They spread out over distance, which limits how much data they can carry.
Sure.
Optical communications use infrared lasers, shorter wavelength, dramatically higher frequency. Yeah. But the trade-off for that massive bandwidth is precision. A laser is a pencil-thin beam. It doesn't spread out.
Oh, I see. So they have to aim it.
Yeah. Exactly. The 20-degree roll aligns Orion's optical transceivers perfectly with the receivers back on Earth. They have to maintain that delicate line of sight to beam back high-definition video, flight plans, and, well, all that science data.
And they need that bandwidth, right, because they are beaming back real-time telemetry for the main event of Flight Day 5.
The OX suit demo.
Yes. Speaking of keeping humans alive in hostile environments, the crew prepares for this high-stakes pressurized dress rehearsal for survival. These are the Orion crew survival system suits, the bright orange ones they wear for launch and re-entry.
Right.
And the stat in the sources that absolutely floored me is this. If the Orion cabin were to depressurize, these suits can keep the crew alive in a breathable atmosphere for up to 6 days.
It's a phenomenal piece of engineering.
But how? How on earth do you train a human to endure 6 days trapped in what is essentially a wearable panic room without losing their mind?
Well, the vital distinction here is that the suit is not entirely self-contained for those 6 days. If the cabin loses pressure, the astronauts are tethered to the spacecraft via umbilicals.
Ah, so the ship becomes the life support system.
Yes. The umbilicals circulate breathable oxygen. They pull away the exhaled carbon dioxide, which gets scrubbed by the ship's systems, and they pump cooling water through a mesh garment under the suit to regulate body temperature.
Wow.
And for hydration, the suits have internal drinking bags that can be refilled through a specialized port without ever breaking the pressure seal.
That is incredible. And this is the first time these suits are being tested in the actual environment of space.
Yeah.
2 of the crew members do what's called a rapid don at an emergency pace, and the other 2 don them at a normal pace. But once they pressurize the suits, maneuvering sounds incredibly difficult.
The term for it is constant volume joint resistance.
Okay, what does that mean?
When the suit is pressurized against the vacuum of space, it becomes rigid. It's essentially an inflated balloon. Yeah. So every time an astronaut bends an elbow or flexes a knee, they are physically fighting the atmospheric pressure, pushing back against the fabric.
Oh, so it's a workout just to move your arm.
An exhausting workout.
And while fighting that pressure and managing those umbilicals, they have to reinstall their seats inside the cabin, which they had uninstalled earlier.
Yes.
And to make it as realistic as possible, Mission Control intentionally vents the cabin pressure overboard down to 11.0 psi for the test.
Yeah, they skip some objectives at the lower 3.7 psi, but the cabin is still partially vented.
So they're wrestling heavy hardware inside stiff balloons in a vented cabin, and then right in the middle of this, the drama hits.
The warning.
Yes, a sudden warning. Cabin leak suspected. Procedure 2.1.0 is called. Imagine being sealed inside a restrictive, inflated suit, tethered to a wall, knowing you might have to live in it for 6 days, and suddenly the ship tells you it's bleeding its remaining atmosphere into the void.
It tests the absolute limits of human discipline to not panic in that moment. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, this was actually the most valuable event of the day
A terrifying alarm.
because it turned out to be a false alarm. It was caused by a cabin fan change right as they went into a loss of signal zone, an LOS zone.
Oh, communications blackout.
Right, so the telemetry systems, the onboard warnings, and mission control had to execute their troubleshooting protocols under genuine duress. They figured out it was a false flag, moded back to maintenance, and reintroduced oxygen. It proved the ultimate redundancy of the Artemis program.
That's amazing, a real-world stress test.
Exactly.
Well, after that intense physical exertion and, the adrenaline of a false alarm, the crew finally gets a moment to look out the window, and what they see visually confirms the orbital math. They are right on the doorstep of the moon. The transcript here is just so cool. They describe the moon as, quote, decidedly large out the window today.
I love that phrase.
Right. And they start identifying specific lunar features with the naked eye. They see the Orientale angular ring. They spot Piazzo. They note that Aristarchus is glowing prominently while Copernicus is slightly dimmer. But the biggest observation is what they see on the Terminator.
The terminator being the dividing line between the sunlit side and the side in shadow.
Right. They note that about 1 Orientale diameter away on the Terminator, they aren't just seeing color variations anymore. They can see actual elevation, topography.
With the naked eye.
Yeah. Why does the topography suddenly pop specifically on the Terminator?
It is all about the angle of illumination. In the middle of the sunlit side, the sun is directly overhead. It washes out shadows, making everything look flat.
Makes sense.
But on the Terminator, the sunlight hits the surface at an extreme shallow angle. This casts massive elongated shadows from every crater rim and mountain peak. Seeing those shadows triggers a psychological shift. It signifies the transition from looking at a celestial body to looking at a destination.
Wow. They're visually navigating a three-dimensional world now. And that visual confirmation perfectly sets up the final major technical milestone of the day. The OTC-3 burn, outbound trajectory correction 3.
Right.
It's a 19-second burn using auxiliary thrusters on the service module at 10:03 p.m. Central Time. But what's wild is that OTC-1 and OTC-2, which were scheduled for days 3 and 4, were totally canceled.
Yes. This speaks volumes about the incredible leap in computational accuracy since the Apollo days.
The sources say they canceled them because the initial translunar injection burned the TLI on day 2 was so perfectly accurate.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean? How does firing an engine near Earth cancel out steering for 3 days? It's like sinking a golf putt from another city.
It really is. Think of it in terms of vector mathematics. When they executed that TLI burn back in Earth orbit, they set an initial velocity and angle. Any microscopic error in that angle compounds over distance.
Angular divergence.
Right. A fraction of a degree error near Earth means you're thousands of miles off target at the moon. The fact that they canceled the day 3 and day 4 corrections means that initial vector was practically flawless.
That is mind-blowing.
It really is. So that 19-second burn on day 5 wasn't even a real course correction. It was just final microscopic fine-tuning to thread the needle for the day 6 lunar flyby.
And immediately following that burn, they don't even rest. They maneuver for opportunistic science, configuring the D5 and Z9 cameras at window 2.
The pace is relentless.
It really is a complete dichotomy compressed into a single 24-hour period. I mean, think about it. Within 1 day, this crew honored religious and historical traditions. They spat on paper to track their immune systems. They survived a pressurized suit test and a false leak alarm. And they fired thrusters to thread the needle for a lunar flyby.
All while hurtling through a lethal vacuum.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is. But, when you distill all the telemetry and the procedures down, I keep returning to that perspective Jeremy Hansen shared earlier in the day.
Oh, about universal love.
Yes, he mentioned that looking back at Earth through that tiny window brought him to a simple truth about universal love. We spent this entire deep dive looking at the technical achievements that got them there, the brilliant hardware.
Right.
But it leaves you with this to consider. Right now, experiencing that overview effect is restricted to a tiny handful of astronauts. But when commercial spaceflight makes looking out that tiny window a regular occurrence for hundreds or eventually thousands of people,
Mm.
how will that fundamental shift in perspective change the way we treat each other down here on Earth?
And if enough people see the world without borders, the borders down here might start to mean a whole lot less.
Absolutely.
That's a powerful thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the raw reality of Artemis II. Keep looking up, keep asking the big questions, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.